They say New Year's Eve is about new beginnings. My husband thought so too, just not with me. While 1,000 guests toasted champagne in our penthouse, he whispered another woman's name in the dark. So at exactly midnight, I gave him exactly what he had earned, and I smiled doing it. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who forgot who they were dealing with, stay until the very end. I want you to understand something before I tell you how it all fell apart. I need you to understand what it was before it broke, because it is easy to look at a burning house and forget that someone built it with their bare hands. Someone chose every brick. Someone mixed the mortar. Someone painted the walls and hung the curtains and learned which floorboards creaked at midnight, so they could step around them in the dark. Someone made it a home. That someone was me. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Not the Atlanta you see in glossy magazines and music videos, the real one. The one with church fans on wooden pews and front porches that sag in the middle, and mothers who stretched $1. So far it nearly snapped in two. My mother was a seamstress. She worked 6 days a week, hunched over a machine, in the back of a shop that smelled of pressed fabric and burnt coffee, sewing other people's beautiful things, ball gowns and wedding dresses and linen suits for people who never once wondered whose hands had made them. We wore what was practical, what was on sale, what held up through another Georgia winter. My father was a preacher with a small congregation and a very large heart, and just enough money to keep the lights on and our faith intact. He used to say that poverty was just a season, not a sentence. I believed him then. I believe him still. But I also learned early that if I wanted something beyond that season, I was going to have to build it myself. Nobody was coming to hand it to me, so I built, I studied until my eyes burned. I earned a full scholarship to study architecture and interior design, the first in my family to go to university on a scholarship, the first to leave Georgia with something other than bus fare and a Bible verse. I graduated at the top of my class with tired eyes, a small mountain of student loan letters, and a hunger that had nothing to do with food. I started small. A one-woman firm out of a shared office space in Midtown Atlanta. I designed restaurants, boutique hotels, community spaces. I poured my entire soul into every room I touched because I had come to believe deeply, personally, almost spiritually, that the spaces people live and eat and breathe inside should make them feel something, should make them feel worthy. And then I met Roland. It was not a fairy tale meeting. There was no chandelier, no ballroom, no moment scripted by someone who believed in easy love. It was a Tuesday afternoon in a diner in Nashville called Patsy's. Cracked vinyl booths, coffee that had been sitting since morning, a renovation project I had just won the contract for, spread across the table in front of me. Roland Ashford was sitting alone in the corner booth, in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, eating scrambled eggs like a man who had just lost something important and had not yet realized it. He looked up when I walked in with my blueprints, and he just watched me work. For 20 minutes he sat there, and when I finally looked up and asked if I could help him, he said, "I'm just watching someone who actually knows what they're doing. It's rare." I told him thank you and looked back down at my blueprints. He left a note on a napkin before he walked out. It had his name and number, and one single line written in sharp, clean handwriting. "You have an eye for turning ruins into masterpieces. I'd like to know more about that." I stood there holding that napkin for a long time. My mother always said God sends people into your life for a reason. What she never told me, what I wish someone had whispered in my ear that afternoon in that diner, is that sometimes the reason is the lesson, not the blessing. Sometimes the person God sends is there to teach you something about yourself that you could not have learned any other way. And the tuition for that kind of lesson is always, always steep. I called him 3 days later, and just like that, my whole life changed. Nobody falls out of love all at once. That is the thing they never show you. Movies give you the dramatic ending, the screaming, the slammed door, the single devastating moment where everything shatters in slow motion. But real love does not break like glass. It erodes, slowly, quietly, like water wearing down stone over years and years, until one day you press your hand against what used to be solid and find only dust. That is what happened to us. And the hardest part, the part that still sits heavy in my chest when I am truly honest with myself, is that I saw it coming. I saw every single sign, and I chose again and again to look the other way. Because loving someone does not make you blind. It makes you desperately, stubbornly determined to see what you want to see instead of what is actually there. It started small, the way these things always do. A phone turned face down on the dinner table, a laugh that stopped the moment I walked into a room, business trips that used to come with itineraries and hotel numbers and evening check-in calls that slowly became, "I'll be back Sunday, don't wait up." I noticed. Of course I noticed. I am a woman trained to see the details in everything. I built entire rooms around the things most people walk past without blinking. The shadow that falls wrong, the seam that does not quite line up. I noticed everything. But noticing and accepting are two very different things. I confronted him once. It was a Wednesday evening in the kitchen of our penthouse. I had made dinner, something I rarely had time for anymore, and I had set the table carefully, and I had decided that tonight I was going to say what had been living in my throat for months. I asked him calmly who he had been on the phone with every night after 11. I asked why his schedule had stopped making sense. I asked him, gently, carefully, still trying to protect us both, if there was something I needed to know. He looked at me across that table with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not guilt, not shame, something colder, something calculated, like a man who had already decided how this conversation was going to go before I opened my mouth. And he said, "This is exactly why I don't talk to you about certain things, Vivian. You take everything and make it smaller than it is. You think small. You always have." He left the room. I sat at that table alone for a long time. I want you to understand what those words did to a woman who had climbed out of nothing, who had built herself from scratch with her mother's resilience and her father's faith and her own 2 hands. I want you to understand that the cruelest thing someone can do to a person who fought to become something is convince them they are still nothing. Not through cruelty, through quiet, deliberate erosion, a word here, a dismissal there, until the woman who once stood at the top of her graduating class starts apologizing for taking up space. And the most devastating part, I believed him, not fully, not forever, but enough. Enough to go quiet, enough to stop asking questions, enough to pour all that unspent pain straight back into his empire instead of into my own healing. I redesigned the crown jewel of everything Roland owned, the Ashford Grand Hotel in Manhattan. I gave that project every broken piece of myself. The lobby ceiling alone took 4 months of my life. The marble inlay pattern in the atrium floor was a design I had sketched on a napkin at 3 a.m, when I could not sleep for thinking about what my marriage was becoming. When Architectural Digest ran a 12-page feature on the property, my name appeared once, buried in paragraph 7. Roland framed the cover and hung it in his office. He never mentioned my name once in the interview, and I told myself that was fine, that love was not about credit, that a good partner holds things up from underneath even when nobody sees her hands. I was so busy being his foundation that I forgot I was also supposed to be my own. What I want you to understand about Roland, and I say this not with bitterness but with the clear eyes of a woman who has had time to understand what she was actually living with, is that he was not a simple villain. That would have been easier. Simple villains are easy to leave. Roland was charming and brilliant, and in those early years, genuinely kind. He saw something in me in that diner that very few people had bothered to look for. For a long time, that mattered enormously to me. But Roland had also grown up in a world where women were either ornaments or assets, where a wife was either a trophy on the shelf or a quiet engine running in the background, keeping everything moving without requiring credit or acknowledgement. He did not see himself as someone who was taking from me. He saw himself as someone who had elevated me, given me access, given me a stage. The fact that he kept erasing my name from the program, he genuinely did not understand why that would matter. In his world, being allowed to perform was enough. Being acknowledged for the performance was something else entirely, something women apparently did not need. That is the specific, insidious cruelty of a man who does not know he is being cruel. He is impossible to argue with, because he believes completely and without question that what he is doing is generosity. I planned that party the way I planned everything in my life, with intention, with care, with the kind of quiet perfectionism that people benefit from without ever fully appreciating. Every detail was mine. The ivory and gold color palette, the cascading white florals that lined the entrance hallway, the custom lighting that made the entire penthouse glow like the inside of a dream at golden hour. The orchestra I personally called and auditioned over 2 weeks. The menu I tasted 3 separate times before approving. 300. Guests, international press. A night designed to announce to the world that Roland Ashford and everything attached to his name had arrived at the highest possible version of itself. I did all of that, with my own 2 hands, and I looked beautiful doing it. I remember standing in front of the mirror that evening, pulling on my dress, a deep burgundy gown that made my mother cry during the fitting. My grandmother's earrings in my ears, hair pinned perfectly, and I looked at myself for a long moment and I thought, you are so tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that lives in your bones, the kind that comes from performing happiness for so long that you can no longer remember what the real thing felt like. From smiling at the right moments and laughing at the right volume and always making sure the room looked perfect and the food was warm and the conversation never landed anywhere uncomfortable. But I lifted my chin. I touched my grandmother's earrings one more time, and I walked out of that bedroom and into a room full of crystal and candlelight and people who had no idea what was living underneath my smile. The evening started the way those evenings always do. Compliments and champagne and conversations that sound important but mean very little. Guests told me the penthouse was stunning. A journalist asked if I had considered publishing a design book. An older woman grabbed both my hands and said, "You are absolutely radiant tonight, darling. Roland is a lucky man." I smiled. I thanked her. I excused myself gently, and then I saw them. It was not dramatic at first. It never is. It was just a direction. Roland moving through the crowd toward the private terrace. Cleo Durant 2 minutes behind him, her champagne glass still in hand, her eyes already finding the door he had disappeared through. I stood very still in the center of the room, and I watched, and I felt something cold and certain move through my body from my chest down to my feet. I followed them. The terrace was one of the most beautiful things I had ever designed. Curved stone railing, warm Edison lights strung overhead in long golden arcs, a view of the Manhattan skyline that made you feel like the whole glittering city had been laid out as a gift just for you. I had designed it for our 3rd anniversary. I had told Roland then, "This is our place, just ours." He was standing there with her in it. I did not push the door open. I stood just behind the glass in the dark, and I watched and I listened. I watched the easy way he leaned toward her, the way she laughed, low, private, the laugh of a woman who has been promised something she believes is real. And then I heard him say it, clearly, without hesitation, like a man who had already made his peace with a decision long before this moment arrived. "After tonight, I'm telling her, I want to start the new year clean." Cleo laughed softly again, and then she said the words that I will carry in my memory for the rest of my life, the words that did not break me, the words that finally and completely set me free. "She'll fall apart. She has nothing without you." I stood there for 4 seconds. I counted them, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I straightened my dress. I touched my grandmother's earrings one last time, and I walked back inside, shoulders back, chin lifted, smiling like a woman who had just remembered exactly who she was. Because something had shifted in me in those 4 seconds. Something that had been sleeping for 3 years had opened its eyes and looked around and was completely, devastatingly awake. And it was not anger. It was not grief. It was something far more dangerous than either of those things. It was clarity. I want you to understand the woman who walked back into that room. She was not the same woman who had walked toward the terrace 2 minutes before. Something had completed itself inside her, like a lock turning over after years of the wrong key being forced into it. She was not shaking. She was not calculating revenge in the hot, messy way that pain usually makes you do. She was simply decided. And there is a particular kind of peace that comes with being decided, a stillness that only people who have been pushed to their absolute limit will ever fully understand. I moved through that crowd like I owned every inch of it, because I did. I found the orchestra conductor first. I leaned close and spoke quietly, and he nodded and stepped back from his podium without question. Then I found the event coordinator. 4 words. Give me the microphone. She looked at me for half a second, reading my face, reading the room, and then she handed it over without a single word of hesitation. There is something about a woman who has fully made up her mind that even strangers recognize and respect. The countdown had already begun in the corners of the room. Guests were pulling each other close. Glasses were raised. The energy in that penthouse was electric and beautiful, and completely unaware of what was about to happen inside it. I stepped to the center of the room. I tapped the microphone once, and 300 people turned to look at me. I smiled, warm, genuine, the realest smile I had given in that entire building all evening, and I thanked them. I thanked them for coming, for celebrating, for filling a space I had built with so much life and laughter. I told them that this penthouse, every room, every detail, every carefully chosen light fixture and hand-selected bloom, had been designed by me. Not by Roland Ashford's team, not by some agency with a press release, by me, Vivian Calloway. A girl from Atlanta whose mother spent her life sewing other people's beautiful things so that her daughter could one day build her own. I heard the room shift, a quiet that was not empty, but full. Then I said, calmly, the way you state a fact you have known for a very long time, that at 11:58 p.m. that evening, my attorney had filed legal separation documents that had already reached Roland's lawyer's inbox. That simultaneously, a formal intellectual property claim had been filed, covering every Ashford property I had conceptualized, designed, and breathed life into over the course of our marriage. A case his own legal team had flagged as a serious risk 2 years prior. A case Roland had laughed off. A case I had spent 6 quiet, invisible, meticulously documented months building, while he had spent those same 6 months believing I suspected nothing. I had suspected everything. I had simply stopped reacting and started preparing. I found Roland's eyes across the room. He had come back inside. He was standing near the terrace door with a champagne glass in his hand and an expression I had never seen on his face in all our years together. Not anger, not shock. The specific, hollow look of a man who has just realized that the person he fundamentally underestimated had been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time. I held his gaze, and I said clearly so the room could hear, so the press could hear, so every person who had ever called me simply Roland's wife could hear, "You told someone tonight that I have nothing without you. But, baby, you built your entire empire on my vision, on my sleepless nights, on my talent that you buried in paragraph 7 and hung on your wall without my name on it. And now I want it back." The clock struck midnight. Somewhere in the room, a glass fell and shattered on the marble floor. I set the microphone down gently. I picked up my champagne glass. I took one slow, deliberate sip. Then I set it down with the softest click, and I turned and walked toward the elevator. Drea was already standing inside it, my coat folded over her arm, a small rolling bag at her feet. Her eyes full of tears she was refusing to let fall, because she knew if she cried, I might too, and we had agreed, not tonight. The elevator doors closed, and I exhaled for the first time in 3 years. The elevator doors opened into the lobby, and I walked out into the cold Manhattan night, and I did not look back. Not once. Because I had learned something painful and important over the years, that looking back is how you convince yourself to return to things that were never good for you, and I had spent enough of my life returning. Enough of my life smoothing things over and swallowing things down and making myself smaller so that someone else could feel larger. That version of me stayed in that elevator. I left her there. And I walked out into the freezing New Year's air, and the cold hit my face like a reminder. I am still alive. I am still whole. Whatever comes next, it is mine. By 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone had stopped being a phone and become something else entirely. I did not know that someone in that room had recorded everything. I did not know that by the time Drea and I had checked into the quiet hotel she had booked 3 weeks in advance, because Drea had believed in this plan before I had fully believed in myself, the video was already moving across the internet with a speed that felt almost violent. By morning, it had been viewed over 4 million times. By afternoon, the number had doubled. My name, my full name, Vivian Calloway, was everywhere. Not in paragraph 7, not buried beneath someone else's headline. Everywhere. Roland's public relations team released a careful, cold statement by noon that said very little while attempting to say enough. It did not work. His company's stock dipped Monday morning. Board members called. Partners who had shaken his hand at our party 12 hours earlier were now very publicly saying nothing, which in that world means everything. And Cleo Durant, the woman who had laughed on our terrace and told him I would fall apart, quietly stopped returning his calls within the week. Because Cleo had not signed up for a man in litigation, she had signed up for a billionaire, and the moment those two things stopped being the same, she was gone. I felt nothing about that. Not satisfaction, not sadness, nothing. Because she was never really the point. The legal process was not fast. I want to be honest with you about that because I think people deserve honesty more than they deserve a clean, pretty story. There were hard mornings. There were days when the weight of what I had set in motion pressed down on my chest, and I sat in that hotel room, and I cried in a way I had not allowed myself to cry in years. Deep exhausted, nobody is watching crying. I cried for the marriage I had wanted it to be. I cried for the years I had given. I cried for the girl who had stood in that diner in Nashville holding a napkin with a phone number, and believed completely, openly, without armor, that she was about to be loved the way she deserved. I let myself cry for her, and then I got up. Every single time I got up. My attorney's case was airtight. 6 months of silence had given me 6 months of documentation, every original blueprint in my name, every design concept email time-stamped and saved, every mood board, every hand-drawn sketch, every written correspondence where Roland's own team had confirmed that the creative vision was mine. He had never thought to make me sign anything over because he had never believed I would ever need to. That is the specific arrogance of a man who mistakes a woman's gentleness for weakness. He had looked at my patience and seen surrender. What he had actually been watching was preparation. 3 months later, we reached a settlement, a significant portion of design royalties across the Ashford portfolio, my name legally and permanently attached to 4 landmark properties, including the Ashford Grand Hotel in Manhattan. a complete separation with terms that made his lawyers go very quiet in a way that told me everything I needed to know about how strong my position had been all along. Drea threw me a small dinner the night the settlement was finalized, just the two of us and my parents and two friends who had known me before Roland and therefore knew exactly who I had always been underneath everything. My mother held my face in both her hands and did not say anything for a long moment. She just looked at me the way mothers look at their children when words are not enough and love has to do all the talking. My father waited until after dinner. He pulled me close in the quiet of the kitchen while my mother laughed at something Drea said in the next room. And he said, softly, in that preacher's voice that had always made me feel like the world had a floor beneath it, "Your grandmother's earrings never looked right on a woman who belonged to someone else." I pressed my face into his shoulder, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely, entirely, peacefully free. I've been sitting with this story for a long time, turning it over in my hands like a stone you find on the ground that looks ordinary until you hold it up to the light and realize it has been shaped by something enormous over a very long time. I have asked myself hard questions about it. I have asked myself what I could have done differently, whether I should have left sooner, whether I missed the signs earlier than I admitted. And the answer, the honest, humbling, uncomfortable answer, is yes. I saw the cracks long before I let myself look directly at them, and for a long time I was ashamed of that. I am not ashamed of it anymore. Because here is what I have come to understand about the people who stay too long in the wrong places. We are not weak. We are not foolish. We are not the cautionary tale that people construct when they sit comfortably outside our pain and say, "I would have left so much sooner." No, you would not have. Not if you had poured that much of yourself into something, not if your identity had become so wrapped around another person's world that leaving felt like amputating a part of yourself. Not if every time you tried to stand up straight, someone you loved looked you in the eye and told you that you were thinking small. Leaving is not the simple thing people pretend it is. Rebuilding is not the clean thing people make it look like on the other side. It is messy and it is frightening. And there are days when you question every single decision you made and wonder if you will ever feel like yourself again. But you do, I promise you, you do. I want to talk about something that nobody in my position usually says out loud. I want to talk about what it means to give everything you have to another person's dream while your own quietly starves. I gave Roland the best years of my professional life. I gave him my creativity, my vision, my sleepless nights, and my relentless attention to every detail. I made his world beautiful, and in return he made me invisible. He took the gift and erased the giver. And when I finally stood up and said, "This belongs to me," the world was shocked. Not because what I did was extraordinary, but because they had forgotten I existed. That is the thing I need you to hear most. Not just the women, everyone. When you erase someone long enough, you make the catastrophic mistake of believing they have disappeared. But we do not disappear. We get quiet, we get still, we get organized. And then, when the moment is exactly right, we remind you precisely who we are and everything we are capable of. I reopened my firm 4 months after that New Year's Eve. I named it what it always should have been, my name, only my name. The waiting list filled in 48 hours. I stood in my new studio on the first morning, a wide open space full of light and blank walls and the particular kind of silence that exists just before something becomes whatever it is going to become. And I thought about that diner in Nashville, about the girl with the blueprints and the scholarship debt and the hunger that had nothing to do with food. And I realized she had never actually left. She had just been waiting, patient and quiet, underneath all those years of performance and pain, waiting for me to come back and find her. I found her,